So today I have the real pleasure of inviting Dr. D. Hello, Daniel.
Hi, glad to be here.
I'm so happy to see you. How are you today?
I'm doing well. It's a great day here in Austin, where I live. Summertime's coming around, and I love the sun. And so,
Yeah,
being able to get out in the sun early morning and throughout the day, it's the best medicine in the world. And so, right now, this is like coming into the best season for me.
I agree 100%. So lovely. Just having the D vitamin on your
Yes,
skin. Yeah.
literally, Dr. D. Right? It's when we talk about vitamin
That
D,
was
I always
funny.
talk about that. I
Spot
was like,
on.
that's like mine.
Oh, that's brilliant. Now, Dr. D, who are you as a person?
Well, um, gosh, that's an interesting question. I mean, aren't we all just really trying to figure that out? At the end of the day, who are we?
Yeah.
Um, I would say that, when I think about that, the definition of that has changed definitely over the past few decades of my life in terms of and this really comes back to health, right? Of who we are as individuals. I mean, who I am, just my history. Before I became a chiropractor, so I'm a chiropractor here in Austin, Texas. I have a family practice, an integrative medical practice. I also do functional medicine. And before that, this is my current life and what I do. But before that, it's kind of wild when you think back about how, the things that led you to where you are. I started my career off completely different. I was getting my PhD in neurogenetics, working for a pharmaceutical company. We were funded in a lab, a phase 1 drug discovery lab. And kind of what we were talking about actually before this, when we first got on the call, um, you know, I there was a time of my life where I thought I was really contributing to health and medicine and science. And I started all of a sudden to realize in this time when I was in graduate school that all the things that I was doing, every year we have more nurses, more doctors, more hospitals, more research, more drugs. We have more of
Right.
everything.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking how much anxiety I got thinking about that, and what I was contributing to really was just going to contribute to that, more of that, and it wasn't getting more people well. And so I was about a year away from graduating or defending my thesis, and I decided to leave and went into chiropractic school. And of course, everybody around me was like, "You're crazy! Like, why are you doing this? What's chiropractic?
Yeah,
And what
yeah.
are you going to do with that?"
Mm.
And that started the second chapter of my life. And so I
Cool.
went to chiropractic school, had a great time in chiropractic school, graduated, started my practice. Um, and I quickly realized that I didn't have the tools that I needed. Not that chiropractic school didn't prepare you, right,
Right.
for what you were going to do, but for what I was interested in, it just didn't give me everything that I needed. So I had to continue my studies, and that kind of led me into where I am today with functional medicine and integrative medicine. And I feel like I'm starting to take another chapter where I'm starting to realize that maybe that's too much. Like you hear about all the biohacking and all the, um,
Yeah.
you know, all the things, right? There's so much
Mm.
science behind health, but I feel
Right.
like we're actually going too much into that direction. And there's so much noise that is now surrounding us. Everybody's confused as heck,
I
right?
was
Like,
going to
what do you,
say confusion is the number one.
yeah.
Left, right, center. What's left, right?
And so that, and so again, to the question, like, who are you? I mean, I'm a chiropractor, I'm a functional medicine doctor, um, scientist. I read every day. I'm reading brand new papers, research papers, and I love it all. And it's great. And the science is important. But I also realize that that's not where health is, right? We have to kind of let some of that go, shake it off, and come back to literally what your question is who are you as beings, right? And remember that we need to be fostering connection, community, love, for ourselves, but also with the people around us. And I really do believe now that is a lot of what's missing when it comes to health. A lot of the things that people are afflicted with really can kind of come back to that disconnection and lack of love for themselves, and of course, maybe the people around them.
Mm. I mean, you were saying it's too much science. What is this due to? Why has all the science just popped out right now? Why do we have so much information? Do you think
That's a
it's
great
social
question.
media or
There's
why is it
actually
so much
books.
research?
Yep, there's books that have been written on the topic of just information, right? So we have information overload. We have so much information that's being pumped out. Research study after research study. Of course, like with the internet, as soon as the internet and everything came online, it was great because we had access to all this information. Information that maybe people didn't have access to before. I mean, of course, we had to go to libraries and things like that and
Yeah.
look up data that way. But all of a sudden you had this dump of information that was uh, put into the world, right? That we had access to. And information is not enough, right? You need to take that information and make sense of it. And then there's also information that's biased and in research, there is a lot of that. Actually, that's also partly of what contributed to me leaving where I was. When I was a graduate student, I started to realize how political everything was. And if you wanted to publish a paper, there was some politics to it. It wasn't just, hey, I've got this great finding and I want to take it to a journal and publish it. It's almost like you had to have permission from the people around you and the scientists that you were working with in your field. And that just didn't seem right. And then there's also, research that has, of course, it's just built-in bias where you have people with agendas. And, if you have enough money and an institution that you're working with, you're going to be able to publish what you want. And so, there is that aspect where you just have tons of data being pumped out because there are agendas and you're trying to build up a foundation of science that supports you. But again, it's biased, right? So there's a lot of information that's pushed out because of that. And then you have on the other end, you have people, I'm going to say like you and I, who might take information and we're trying to make sense of it ourselves and we're putting all that out also on the other end, right? So you have like the scientific world, you have communities of just people, individuals, health conscious individuals that are also sharing their information, publicly. And so we just have all of this and it all kind of comes together and it's a lot of noise. I mean, you get a lot of information that's out there and who's right and who's wrong. I think ultimately N equals 1. Like you're the experiment for yourself and you have to figure out what works for you. You can take information that you're reading and hearing about out there, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to be intimate with yourself and see if it applies to you. And I think that's a very, very important lesson that most patients have to take because you'll take information that you read and then sometimes people, just quickly apply it to yourself. Like, oh, let me do that. I mean, it may not work for you, right? Like all diets work, not for all people. Everybody's different and you have to figure out which diet is going to work best for you. And of course, this. I mean, there's thousands of different types of diets that are out there. So when we
Yeah,
talk
for
about
sure.
information,
Yeah,
lots
yeah.
of noise.
Mm.
But yeah, there's again agendas, political agendas, scientific agendas, and then again you have the layperson who's also sharing information, trying to interpret that information and putting it out there. And
So
then
when you talk about agendas, what do you think about in particular? Can you give me an example of an agenda?
yeah, well, gosh, I mean, a good example would be something like, let's say, heart disease, right? And I was just writing about this week. That's why I'm going to talk about it. But what's the primary driver of heart disease, or what do you think if you walked into a room full of 1,000 people and you asked them what causes heart disease? What types of answers do you think you're going to get in that room from people?
Stress, wrong diet.
Okay, so stress is a big one. I would say cholesterol, saturated fat,
Yeah.
like these are things that people have kind of been ingrained with. And if we're talking about an agenda, something like the American Heart Association, you can go back to the 1950s when they basically took on, created a war really against fat, saying that fat was the primary driver of heart disease, all coming from a study. Have you ever heard of Ansel Keys by any chance? Dr. Ansel Keys? Um,
No,
so
I'll
this
have to
was
check that up. Yeah.
yeah, Dr. Ansel Keys. So
Hmm.
he published a study called the 7 Countries Study and basically showed how in countries where people consumed more saturated fat, they had higher rates of heart disease. Okay, this is a famous study. You can look it up, the 7 country study. Well, it turns out that this study was basically fraudulent. There was data points that were missing. There was 22 countries that they looked at. Only 7 of the studies, they took data and published it. The other 22 showed no relationship between saturated fat and causing heart disease and whatnot. But
Gotcha.
that wasn't what was published, right? So They published the study, American Heart Association at this time ran with it, and then they just kept drilling this whole concept or idea of how saturated fat drives heart disease. And again, this was in the 50s, and you can clearly see where over time, this just kept, the research just kept piling and piling up, and they basically are just trying to, it's like confirmation bias, right? Trying to demonstrate this strong, or trying to create a relationship when it's really not there. And there are dozens of studies that show otherwise. But here we now find ourselves in this place where how do you backtrack, from that? And how do you eliminate that? Alzheimer's. Gosh, this just came out like a year ago or 2 years ago, where you hear about 20 years of research that was basically based on fraudulent data, right? So you have all this mountain of research from an agenda, again, of trying to prove a certain concept of what drives Alzheimer's disease. And then it created this huge flood of papers that were based on faulty science. So again, that's kind of an example of how agendas can be created that give you information that may not be correct.
Wow, I'm getting chills. Whew.
It's fascinating whenever you look into that. And it's complicated. I mean, you have to understand how to read a research paper. You have to understand the methodologies, and most people don't, right? But you can just read headlines, sensationalism, right? Sensational science type headlines. And that's what, of course, grabs us. And there's unfortunately just way too much of that, that we're exposed to.
So today you work with functional medicine. What is that?
So functional medicine is an application. You could be, you go to medical school, you could be an optometrist, you could be a dentist, you could be a chiropractor, a physical therapist, a psychiatrist, and you can practice functional medicine. So functional medicine is a framework that you would apply to whatever it is that your goal is in your profession. It uses advanced biomedical testing. So, we have the technology that we can take and use to assess somebody's health objectively, but combines it with the safety and efficacy of natural medicine, as opposed to, of course, traditional medicine, where typically you're, getting recommended for certain prescriptions to overcome your ailments, or, surgical procedures, things like that. So functional medicine is a world where we really just ask why. And there's a lot of terms that get interchanged here, right? So you have integrative medicine, holistic medicine, natural medicine, functional medicine. I think a lot of that is really kind of the same. You have similar goals. The doctor has a similar goal in terms of helping the patient, where, the idea is to try to help improve how their body is functioning, how their body is working. If you have high blood pressure, for example, the idea is not, let's give you, which blood pressure pill do you need, right? The idea is to ask why. Why is your blood pressure elevated? And then work towards correcting that. What systems of the body are imbalanced, that and can you identify an imbalance and then work towards correcting that to solve your problem, rather than, of course, just covering up the symptom.
Yes, going to the bottom line with the problem. Yeah. I read something interesting about fecal transplant therapy. What the heck is that?
Right. Are you familiar with that term, right? The microbiome, right? So this
I am. Yeah.
It's all fascinating. It's also very new, by the way. And so we always, same thing like we were kind of talking about with so much noise. There is so much noise right now in the field of the microbiome and our gut and bacteria and how all this works. But yeah, the collection of organisms that live in your digestive tract. I mean, really in our body. Going back to your first question, who are you? You're going to think I'm human, but you're not. It's crazy. You are actually more bacterial, more microorganism than you are human, which is, again, just wild to think about. You have way more bacterial cells in your gut than you do human cells in your whole body. So technically, again, you are more bacterial. Now, the microbiome, again, is just a collection of bacteria and fungus and viruses and all these organisms that live in our gut. And these organisms drive health. 80% of your immune system lives in your digestive tract. These organisms produce neuropeptides that travel up to your brain and influence brain function. They influence your hormone profile. They influence your metabolism. They do so many things for you. So understanding that, if you have a human who is not well, you can also look at their microbiome, and generally speaking, you're going to find that their microbiome is unhealthy. They have a bad mixture of bugs that are in their gut. You can take somebody that's overweight and you can do a profile of their microbiome, and you're going to find that groups of people that are overweight have similar types of compositions of bacteria in their gut.
Mm-hmm.
You can take people that are lean or metabolically healthy. They have very
Right.
similar microbiomes. So
Mm-hmm.
they've done this. They took literally fecal material, poop, from inside a healthy, lean human,
Right.
transplanted that into the person that is overweight. They didn't change their diet, didn't do anything else, but they monitor them over time. And sure enough, you find that they start to lose weight and they start to improve their metabolism. So this just goes to show you that the microbiome influences overall health. Recently, and maybe this is why you saw this, there's an infection called Clostridium difficile, C. diff infections, which are very difficult to eradicate. They don't respond very well to antibiotics. In fact, antibiotics can make them worse.
Mm-hmm.
And you can treat C. diff naturally, by the way, so you should always try to do that. But if you can't, for these people, mortality was high because there was nothing else you could really do for them.
Sure.
Well,
Yeah.
what they've recently found was that fecal transplants were very effective, over 95% effective in treating. And up until just this week, you had to have a surgical transplant in order for this to happen. But they just approved a pill that you can take, which is
Yeah.
literally what it is. It's poop that you're taking from, healthy individuals, giving it to the people that are sick in order to change their microbiome and influence their health. So that's what fecal transplants are. It's taking, I like to look
Wow.
at it like soil. Like if you have a garden
Yeah.
that is,
Mm-hmm.
unhealthy, you can put organic soil there and revitalize it. So that's basically
Yeah.
what you're doing to your body.
Wow, that sounds amazing. That could start
Yeah.
a whole new revolution then if people, obviously with the obesity epidemic we have today, if people can just take a pill, would that help? Would that solve
You
the
know,
obesity problem, you think?
there's a part of me. So here's where there's a part of me that cringes at that, because I don't like, people just to think like, oh, I can just take this pill and I'm going to be fine. That never does so well for us. That's the good intentions, right? Like, oh, that sounds good, let's do that. But our bodies are way more complex than that. And we have to appreciate that. And that's also, again, we have to remember that this is all really good science. I think that's what it is it just helps us to understand what's happening.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that's what we should do. And so what I mean by that is this just tells you how important the terrain, the environment is of your body. And so take care of your body, take care of your environment, and think about that. I think that's what that science really tells us. Yes, in critical cases, like there's a time and a place for urgent care. You crack your head open, don't go to a functional medicine doctor, right? Go to an urgent care facility. They're going to, if you stroke out, have a heart attack, go to an urgent care doctor. They're going to save your life. If you have a raging C. diff infection and you're about to die, okay, take a poop pill, right? It's going to treat you. But you can always, way before all that stuff happens, understanding how that works, you can make the decision to correct your environment to be building a healthy microbiome, so that way you're going to live a healthy life. I think that's the take-home message, and that's where the medicine is, really, is understanding that our environment plays a major role. And obviously you can take that to where you can look at the environment that we have created for ourselves as a population. It's not very healthy. And sure enough, that's why you see people that are unhealthy, right? So again, I think we should be extracting from that and applying it in a bigger way.
So what is a good environment in your viewpoint, from your point of view, being a
Gosh,
functional?
where I come from with this is, I think, and I don't do this, by the way, myself, but like if we took care of the land, if we think of farmers, right? Like going back to that, I mean, as an animal, as an organism, your health is dictated by your environment, and it begins with the soil, it begins with the land that you're in. Literally, the soil is like a microbiome. It has a collection of organisms, viruses, bacteria, fungus, all these things. It's where your food comes from. So tending to the land, protecting that, so that way you have healthy food, which then influences your body in a positive way. That also leads to, oh, I need to protect the rivers, and I need to protect the air and the rainfall, right? So I think it really begins with that. And obviously we've run into some problems as a society with pollution, chemical
Fertilizers
exposure.
and
Right. Yeah. So it's, and again, this goes back to fertilizers, petrochemical companies creating these chemicals, right? And then they work with our agriculture companies and our food. And then of course there's some of that plays a role into medicine and driving disease and dysfunction. So it's this whole thing that's just, how do we break away from that, right? And that's a big problem. But I think, you can get so overwhelmed, but you could also just say, wait a minute, look at my location where I live and what can I do to try to protect myself the best way with wherever I'm at. And you could always do that. If you don't live anywhere where you can touch the soil, get a house plant. I mean, there's always something you can do to connect back to the soil, right? To where life comes from. And so, yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Should you just buy organic foods?
Well, we try to, you know, it's certainly, and I'll say this, I mean, I realize this, I cringe at this too, because I can tell my patients 100% organic, you know, pesticide free, hormone free, grass fed meats only, don't consume out of plastics. That's all great, but that's not practical for everybody, right? And I think that there's a lot of people, unfortunately, there are a lot of people that can't afford to do that. So, you know, I don't want to put them in a corner and say, sorry, too bad for you. So yeah, it would be great if we could all buy organic, but I realize that that's not possible. So again, you know, I'm a big fan of progress over perfection as a concept in our health, and you do the best that you can. If you can't buy
Yeah.
organic food, then okay, you know, it is what it is. Wash it, clean it. There's got to be something else that you can do, you know, to create a positive influence in your life. And so there's so many different things, right, that you can work on. But yeah, I would recommend that we just consume organic if possible. I think it's
And
crazy
how,
that we,
yeah,
uh,
sorry.
I was just going to say that I think it's wild that we have to um, focus on organic food, that we pay more for organic food for something that's healthy. And you know, there's all the other foods which are bad for us, that's kind of the norm. You know, it should be the other way around, I feel. But
And what is organic food for those who don't really know? They heard the word organic food, but they don't understand the process of growing organic from
right.
versus
So
non-organic.
Um, are you familiar with regenerative agriculture? Have you
Yes.
heard of that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, if we really are going organic, because even within the field of organic, if you were to look at the certifications, those are all different.
Yeah.
And so that's how wild it is that it's not even just to say organic. It's not even, you know, what we would,
Yeah.
you and I would consider to be healthy and
Yeah.
clean, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think regenerative agriculture is probably the next best step of where we're going. And whenever you have certifications for that, that's going to be the best thing. But, you know, for people that don't know, organic is where land is clean, free from pesticides, herbicides, to a certain extent, right? There's a certain amount that is now allowed, unfortunately. But you're feeding your animals healthy food that's not contaminated with any kind of chemicals. You're raising them sustainably, appropriately. You're trying to treat them the best that you can. You know, that's really what we're talking about when we talk about organic foods. Versus, let's say, something that's been genetically modified or sprayed with glyphosate, right? Herbicide, Roundup, which is a
Mm-hmm.
popular one. You know, that type of
Mm-hmm.
stuff, which of course
Yeah.
causes problems for your body.
Mm. And toxic chemicals are everywhere. So how can we, on an everyday basis, how can you eliminate or reduce toxic chemicals? Where do you find them?
Right. So unfortunately, it's everywhere. And I say this because again, you can get overwhelmed and just develop anxiety. You're not going to get away from it, unfortunately. You know, I'll just say that it's close to impossible. Unless you know, move to some pristine land, if that exists. We now
Yeah.
know that glyphosate, so Roundup,
Mm-hmm.
it's part of our particulate matter. So floating in the air. I mean, it's literally just in the air. It's in rainfall. It's everywhere, unfortunately. We've got phthalates, forever chemicals, plastics, and all parts of the planet, right? Everywhere. So I don't think that, you know, it's not practical for somebody to focus on 100% elimination. I think you go overboard probably with that. But number one is awareness. Always start to teach yourself to become aware of what you're exposing yourself to. I mean, you can, if you're not familiar with the Environmental Working Group, EWG, EWG.org, they have a database. You can just go and look in your house, type up all the things that you have in your house, and they'll list out, you know, the highest levels of toxicity to the lowest, things like that. So becoming an educated consumer, I think that's always number one, right? Is stopping the chemicals from coming into your own house. So that's probably the best control that you have, because it's going to be hard to control what's happening around, right, in your environment. Being mindful of when you buy clothes, wash it, right? Don't just put it on your body, like wash it a couple of times to clean things off. There's flame retardants and phthalates and things on those clothes. The food that you purchase, if you're not purchasing organic, then I would suggest that you're washing it off. I mean, there's a number of different chemicals that you're going to find that are on that. So you soak and you wash it, you know, that type of thing. Number one is stopping the like I said, so just becoming aware. And even if that's the best that you can do is just becoming aware, I think that's good, because at least you know. Number two, realize you hear about detoxification. And I think that's, there's a lot of fluff around that. Detoxing is important. I'm not saying it's not, but you detox naturally. Your body, your liver, your gallbladder, your intestines help you to detox. So if you want that to be operating 100%, you should focus on improving the function of your body. Make sure you're well, make sure you're healthy. And that's the secret there, is that if you take care of yourself, your body does this stuff naturally. You're not a snowflake.
Like
your body knows
exercise,
how to,
sleep, eat well, less
yeah,
stress,
I mean, yeah, it's
recharge.
all the
Yeah.
basics, right? That's what I'm saying. It's not like there's no hard science to this. If you just take care of yourself, your body has a fighting chance at doing it. So taking care of yourself and then becoming aware, oh, I'm going to stop the onslaught of stuff coming into my home, and then I'm doing a good job of taking care of myself. I mean, I think that puts you in a pretty good place, to really work on these things. Now, if somebody has, you can tell through labs, by the way, like I can do a blood chem panel on somebody, and I can see if their detox pathways are healthy or not. So if they're not, then yeah, there's very specific things you can do to try to improve the function of that detoxification pathway. There's like a metabolic panel, there's liver enzymes, there's inflammation markers, there's specific mineral patterns of minerals that you can look at on your blood work, where if there's a certain pattern, that could usually indicate that you're using up these minerals, probably because of the toxicity that you're exposed to. Like heavy metals, for example, or they will create a certain type of pattern of mineral imbalances in your blood chemistry. So you could be objective and you can really see, is there something specific happening? And if there is, again, you set up a plan to try to fix it. But just to randomly do a detoxification program, that's what I'm saying, is like, I don't know. It's great. It's fine if you have good intentions, but if you're really trying to get rid of something in your body, you got to get specific and know exactly what you're trying to eliminate. Because we're all different in terms of, what we're trying to do there.
What do you think about fasting?
No, I think it's great. I use it quite a bit for my cardio metabolic patients. So patients that have, blood sugar dysregulation, cholesterol problems, triglyceride problems, that type of stuff. I do think that there's a lot of people on their own that are doing it wrong. First of all, just fasting. If we talk about just fasting, avoiding food for a period of time, that helps to reset your body, right? Autophagy is like cellular recycling. So your body has this natural defense mechanism where if you go into a state of famine, if you're not feeding, your body's going to dump all the stuff it doesn't need. I mean, that's the easiest way that you can really understand it. And so you start to express these genes that are helping your body to revitalize when you go through a period of famine. That's pretty cool. So just avoiding food, you can do that. And I think that's great. Intermittent fasting, I find when I start working with patients, if they're doing that wrong, in the sense that they're typically just depriving themselves from food. Intermittent fasting is you're still eating the amount of calories you need to be eating, but within a certain window, right? Most people, when they start to intermittent fast, they just decrease their calories altogether. They're not eating enough, and that can create problems. So for somebody out there that's wanting to do intermittent fasting, I would say just make sure you're still eating enough food. You're not starving yourself, and that's because that could start to cause problems, right? So that's the only thing, is I would be careful with that. I do like fasting, but again,
exactly. For how long though? How many hours?
Right. So there's different methods. There's different methods you can look at with this. And going back to the science of it, actually recently there were some papers that were published that really suggest that there was no difference in terms of let's say metabolism or body composition and weight loss. That if people lost weight, it's because they were lowering calories, and we know that that's going to cause weight loss, right? So that's okay. But if you have a preference, a personal preference of how you're eating, then it works for you. And that's great. And I think that when we talk about diet, following a specific type of dietary template that is sustainable for you and that you love and that you're going to stick with, at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. That's the reality, is whether you're on a low carb diet, paleo, vegetarian, intermittent fasting, carnivore, whatever it is, if you can just stay consistent, if you can do this for 6 months, awesome, because that's going to give you so much data that you're going to learn whether or not it's working for you. Most people can't do it for a month, right? Like stick to a plan for a month. And so again, that's what's important. And even with fasting, you got to stick to it. Somebody will try it for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and they say, oh, this is not working, and they stop. That's not enough time. And we should be much more, nicer to ourselves when it comes to to how we're approaching this. But in terms of frequency and timing, if somebody's doing intermittent fasting, there's different methods, like every other day, like where somebody eats on Monday, today they'll eat, tomorrow they don't eat, Wednesday they eat, so every other day. There's windows morning where you get up, you're going to eat from, let's say, 8 to noon. And that's when you're eating, and then you're not eating food the rest of the day. And then you can flip that, where some people are eating in the afternoon, right? Let's say from noon up until 4 or 5, something like that. There's a 16-hour fast, 16-8, where you're eating for 8 hours, fasting for 16. So different methodologies, but from what I've read and the science behind all this, it doesn't seem like there's any one that's better than others. It comes down to the individual of what works best for you. And so that, I think, is always the take-home message with these things, is trying to make it applicable for you and sustainable.
And should you eat like one meal a day for a long life to have such a for longevity, or should you eat 3 meals a day, like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and snack in between? Some scientists say that you should just have one meal
Right.
to maximize the length of your life, whereas others say you should eat on a regular basis.
So the answer to that question is, and this is where, again, I don't like to take research data and apply it to my patients. You use that knowledge and you have a working knowledge. Okay, maybe I've got some ideas of how to work with an individual, but at the end of the day, N equals 1. You're the experiment. So if you're my patient and you asked me this, I would say, well, we got to figure that out. How does 1 meal a day work for you? Is that working out for you? And so you can begin to try to observe this objectively. Blood sugar regulation. So now we have access to like continuous glucose monitors, right? You attach a monitor to your arm. You can see how your body's responding to 1 meal a day, to 3 meals a day. Do you do better with food in the morning? Do you do better with food in the afternoon? Do you do better with 1 meal that's high protein? Do you do better with 1 meal that's high fat or high carb? These are all very important questions to answer, but for the individual, right? I can't really tell you that unless you start to take data points and you figure that out. And that is, I think, where it's at. You have to learn how your body works to really come to this. I mean, we can have a discussion and conversation about what the science says, but at the end of the day, people want to know what works for them. And you got to do the work. You got to figure that out for yourself. And that's how you proceed, right, through those things. I can generalize, and I would say that for most people, 2 meals seems to be appropriate for most people. Like if I were to talk, if we're talking longevity, metabolism, keeping all your blood chemistry clean, seems like 2 meals a day seems to be pretty good. 2 big, nice meals where you're getting
meals,
plenty of protein, good amount of fiber from your vegetables, nutrients, eating good food. Yeah, that seems to be appropriate. Is somebody working out? And if they're working out hard, are they not working out? All that also matters in terms of if we're talking about 1 meal versus 2 meals versus 3 meals. My son he's an Olympic weightlifter. He's 20. He has to eat a lot. He has to eat a lot in order to maintain what he's doing, right? If he were to fast, it would not work for him. And so again, everybody is different.
And my final question within your field of being a doctor is, I have a daughter, she's 11 going 12 soon, and this period thing starting soon, and many girls today entering into having the period so much earlier than when I grew up. It seems to be a common theme. The girls are having the periods, menses, way earlier than years ago.
It's happening much faster. You're right. It is absolutely happening. So there are changes that are occurring. Let me say this. Let me first start. I always have to say this. Let me start off by saying, as a man, I do not have authority to talk to you about a period, like your menstrual cycle or anything like that, right? And I always just say that. Now, obviously, as a doctor, I know about all this. I write about this. I work with a lot of women on hormones and optimizing female health. And I think it's a tragedy that we don't have enough data to really be able to offer answers and solutions. I mean, for decades, for almost all of medicine, it's been male dominated. And in science, the questions you ask are the answers you get, right? So the research that you're doing is all based on the questions you're asking. And unfortunately, a lot of that has been dominated by men who are asking men questions, not women. And so for thousands of years, we've needed females, right, to be asking the right questions to understand female health. And we just haven't had that. Recently, that's starting to happen, which is great. I think it's amazing. We have all this data, but it's so new. And so, and like the weather, I like to use, this as an analogy where if I asked you to tell me what the weather is going to be like next week, but I only gave you 2 or 3 data points, you're going to have a crappy forecast. You're not going to know what's going to go on. But if I gave you 30 years worth of data, well, now we're talking, right? Now you can really extrapolate. Well, that's where we are with women's health. And if we talk about something like your period or menstrual cycles, what is normal, what's not normal? Well, think about how long we've been really tracking this as a population, right? So who the hell knows what normal is, first of all, because we haven't been looking at it. Again, going back kind of like to diet, the best that we can do, unfortunately, is you have to know you. You have to, and I'm a big fan of you tracking your period with period trackers. I want to know, the length of time, your bleed cycle, the days of your bleeding. Are you observing changes in your mucus production? All this type of stuff, right? Because that is, as a woman, that is your vital sign. That's so important. And I think that if you really pay attention to that over time, you're going to see how changes in your health influence that. And that's data. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? And so for any female who just started, even if she started young or whatever, I think that's important, is as soon as you can become intimate and aware and learn about your period and own it, because that is going to be such an important part of your life in terms of data and knowing what's good or bad for you, right? So again, I'm going to answer your question, but before we even talk about why this is all happening, I think we need more people just to become aware of basic metrics and tracking this stuff, because that's such an important thing, whether it starts early, whether it starts late, because that's where you're going to be able to figure this out. I mean, I have women that want to work with me because they're starting to transition into menopause early, like in their 30s. And that's, okay. Yeah. And then I start asking questions. Well, what's your period like? And I don't know. So that's what I'm saying. It makes it very hard then. Okay, well, we need to start tracking this data so that way we can see if we can make sense of it, to know what's going on, good or bad. I mean, you just take the data down and pay attention to it. I think that's important. Now, while all this is happening, my personal thoughts is going back to chemicals and plastics, very, very strong connections in the science is all there as far as early onset menstruation and exposure to what's called xenobiotics, or estrogen-like compounds, which are abundant in our society now. And this is, again, just plastics, phthalates, flame retardants, all the stuff that you find in your typical everyday household cosmetic products, consumer products, cleaning products. It's all there. And are you familiar? There was a study that was published. This was by the Environmental Working Group about gosh, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, where they found that the average number of chemicals in an umbilical cord, right? 255, I think that was the number.
Ooh, yeah.
It's wild, right? To think about. And so stuff like that, I think that's all and again,
so even the fetus in the womb, you getting toxins.
Right. Yeah. And that's got to be influencing, right, in some way, how all this is panning out. I mean, because we know these chemicals are or act as estrogens in the body. And so if you have higher exposure, it's just going to lead to that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's, currently the strongest theory would be the exposure to chemicals leading to that.
And that can lead to cancers and breast cancers, or?
We're going to find out, right? Because we're seeing all that happen right now. And unfortunately, it takes 20, 30 years for cancer to show its ugly face. And so we're going to see all that likely. And it's not just one thing. I think that's also very hard in science to single something out, like something like cancer. There's so many things. You've got the chemical exposure, you've got physical trauma, you've got emotional traumas, environment, literally where you live. Like, are you living in a cleaner, city, a dirtier city? Are you, all that stuff, right? All these things matter. And how do you make sense of that? It's very difficult, right? And I think this also is a part of the problem with just methodology of science, is that we tried it like a double-blind controlled trial. That's the gold standard for asking questions and figuring things out and knowing whether something specifically is causing a problem. But there's built-in problems with that, where we are literally agreeing to blind somebody from the placebo effect. And that takes away power, literally, as an animal, from a human being, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's, again, and that just kind of opens up, that's a whole nother can of worms, but
Not a
that's
cat. Yeah,
part of the problem.
exactly. Yeah. Oh, well.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right, Dr. D. Crazy. Now, what is the biggest fear you have faced in your life so far?
Gosh, I don't know that I've faced it, but I'll tell you,
Or have?
yeah, I think about this and I think about this with my kids, being alone, lack of connection, disconnection. Quite honestly, I mean, for me, connection is one of the most important things. And I would say, yeah, just being alone, disconnected, or isolated. And I mean, you know this. It's ironic that we live in this technologically advanced world where we're here having this conversation through Zoom, which is amazing. So we're connected. Um, but it's ironic that we have this loss of true, genuine human connection, and that we're living our worlds, through this, right? And so I get scared of that, and even with my children, is yeah, use this stuff, it's great, but we're also missing out. There's, it's so easy to have this online persona that's easily curated. Um, and then again, I think that leads to less genuine, authentic human connections. Even with
Like
health,
less empathy? Like, you you had to train
right. Well, so
building your
there's
empathy,
that.
and everything is sort of, all relationships, you need to have empathy to have healthy, strong relationships.
Such an important part of, yeah, you're exactly right, when you say that. And it's easy for somebody to look online and see things that people are doing that are healthy, but that may not be true. And I see this, like, I have patients that where they are and where they want to be, there's such a huge Grand Canyon or chasm of where they are and where they want to be, and it's like, how am I going to ever get there? And then if you go online and you see like all this stuff happening, I think it just makes it so much harder for somebody to make the step, because they're like, wow, I'm never going to be able to do that. Look, and the reality is that person is probably exactly where they are and they don't see it. Right. So that's what I mean by like genuine human authentic connection, and seeing that we're all experiencing the same thing. We all have these same feelings, but it's just not real because we have this lens, unfortunately, that we're viewing the world from, and we're connected in that sense, but we're disconnected from reality. And again, that's when you ask my fear, that's what it is. And yeah, and so how do we get away from that, or where's the medicine and where's the healing that comes from that? I mean, those are things that I've been thinking about and journaling and writing about and trying to come to some kind of solution for.
Mm. And I think, talking to your children as well, and being real and authentic yourself, being a role model, and not being on your phone constantly, and just being present, that is also prevention, I think, for the future generation, not to have depression and anxiety and,
Right.
eating disorders. And it all comes down to presence, being there, being here right now, and self-love.
It's such a scary
And,
thing. It's such a scary thing to see right now
and
happening. It's wild. Everybody on their phones, and yeah, and like not paying attention to each other. It's wild.
mm. So where do you hope we are in 10 years from now in the world?
I do hope that we can move right now, again, with all the noise, right, that we were talking about earlier. There's so much information. I hope that we can get back to making sense of things for ourselves, and connection is part of this too, right? Being deeply connected to yourself and the world around you, and learning how to shield yourself from all the noise that's out there that contributes to anxiety and depression, and oh, I'm not doing enough, or I'm not doing the right things. I hope that in 10 years we're not hacking. I think that's I don't like that word. Our health shouldn't be hacked, right? The
No.
human condition is not, I mean, there's love that should be coming from this. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I feel is like the biohacking and the tricking our bodies or trying to engineer it and do a certain thing. That to me doesn't come from a place of love. And I hope 10 years from now, self-love is really, this thing is just automatic, or that we have a better approach towards teaching our children what that means and how to express it and how to use it for themselves. Because I do feel that if we have a strong sense of self-love, love for ourselves, that is where the best medicine. Somebody wants to follow a diet, somebody wants to change their health, somebody wants to get fit. It's typically for some reason that's deeply embedded back to where they have a lack of love or a lack of sense of belonging, or they're
Validation from external factors. Yeah.
Right, right. And so I
Mhm.
hope that we can kind of come to that where we really realize that and see that that's what it is. That's really what we all are aiming for. More and more, that's what I see. And I have I mean, yeah, I can science the heck out of somebody's health with their blood chemistry and all the testing and all that. But the conversations that I have with patients more and more about this topic, that's where the medicine is, quite honestly. And that's what I see with a lot of patients. And so that's why I say I hope that that's where we can get.
And normalize healing. Talk, the healing should be a normal, such a normal part of growing up, and we should, no stigma, no shame. It's just normal,
Right.
like it is eating and sleeping, and healing should just be as important.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Is symptoms, we all too often think negative of those, like a fever. When you get a fever, of course we can say like, oh my gosh, my body, I'm sick, I feel horrible. We should have grace and self-love and say, oh, thank you. My body is detecting something that's not right. And the symptom is literally the medicine. Your fever is the medicine to overcome it. So it's flipping the switch and looking at what's right in your body, not what's wrong. And all too often we've just blamed it. We blame our body. This is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. But it's all, if you flip it, it's all right. Your body doesn't do anything wrong for you. It's doing all the right things for you. Your body loves you, and that's why it does what it does. And yeah, so I think just having that understanding is such an important thought to meditate on.
Thank you so much. It's been absolutely amazing. So everything comes down to common sense at the end. It's not rocket science.
Right. That's the irony. And I feel is you learn all these things, I know all this information. And then at the end of the day, it just comes down to, hey, let's just move better, eat better, have better connections, love each other. And that's it.
That's it. Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for inviting. I enjoyed this conversation.